the 12 sons of Jacob became the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel, as we've discussed. Today I want to talk about his son, Dan. He was the first son of Jacob and Bilhah. Now remember, Jacob had two wives, Leah and Rachel. Leah was very fruitful and had son after son after son, and Rachel was barren and had no children at all. And it grieved her heart. So she decided in the custom of the day that she would give her handmaiden to Jacob as wife, and any children that she would bear would be raised by Rachel and would be called her child. So Bilhah conceived and gave birth to Dan. Rachel named him Dan which meant to rule or to judge. And that fit in with the prophecy that Jacob gave, that the tribe of Dan would be the judges of Israel. Also, it was translated that it meant God's judgment in favor of Rachel because now she had a child. Not much is said in the Bible about Dan, the person, or the tribe, nor in the Torah. But there is history that tells about Dan. It was one of the smaller of the 12 tribes of Israel, and it might be because Dan only had one son. So it took a while for that tribe to get started and to multiply. The judges came from the tribe of Dan. One of the most infamous members of that tribe was the man we know as Samson, the man with the long hair who was betrayed by his unfaithful lover, Delilah. And we know the story of Samson, that he chose to do what he wanted to do, to exalt himself, to get his own way rather than to follow the rules that God had set forth for that tribe. However, there's a very interesting story that I just learned as I was doing research for this sermon. And I don't know that I've ever heard it before or even read it and noticed it, but this is what happened. Dan had one son, and his name was Cusham. Cusham was deaf, couldn't hear anything that was being said around him. Remember when Jacob was dying, he asked that his body be returned to Canaan, to the place where the patriarchs were buried. It was a tomb that would hold 8 bodies, and in that tomb were Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob's wife Leah. So Jacob's plan was to be buried in that tomb as well. So his sons, following his instructions, prepared his body and took it back to Canaan to be placed in the tomb. But when they got there, Jacob's twin brother Esau was waiting with his army. How many times in his life did Jacob have to face Esau and his army? We talked about it when Jacob came back to the land of Canaan, and he was with his family and his wives, and he sent all of the family, all of the soldiers, all of the servants out ahead of him because he knew he was going to meet his brother Esau and the army. They were like the infantry. They were the fodder. Maybe if he kills all those people, then he won't get to me and my favorite wife, Rachel. But Esau did not plan to slaughter Jacob. He planned to make peace. And they did have peace. They lived peacefully. They settled in various parts of the land so they didn't cross each other's boundaries. And it worked out until the time that Jacob wanted to be placed in the tomb. Esau said, "No, Jacob's place is taken by his wife Leah. That leaves one slot left, and that's mine." Remember, Esau was the oldest son and he was going to have the birthright, the blessing that went to the oldest son in that time, and his brother Jacob stole it from him. Jacob was known as the usurper, the one who took the place of the man who should have had that blessing. He stole it from him, and he ran and hid. Jacob was not a brave man. They lived in harmony of sorts for hundreds of years until it was time to bury Jacob. And Esau said, no, you're not getting this one. You got the birthright, you got the blessing, you got the tribes of Israel, you got all the property, but you're not getting the burial space. Cusham, remember, was there, the son of Dan, so Jacob would have been his grandfather. Instead of just battling it out there, they sent Naphtali, who was another son of Jacob. And Naphtali means fast runner. They sent him on his way to get the proof that Jacob was entitled to be in that grave. But while Naphtali was gone, Cusham decided to take matters into his own hands. He didn't hear all the negotiations. He didn't hear the plan. He just knew that his grandfather was not going in that grave because his great uncle wasn't allowing it. So he took his sword and cut off Esau's head. That settled that matter. And the head rolled into the grave. So actually there's 8 people in the grave of the patriarchs and a head. And that's the way they sealed that tomb. Now, I thought that was really interesting since I'm connected with Skyway Memorial Park. And I kind of have to throw this in there because sermons are about practicality as well as spiritual insight. I would like to say that it's very necessary to pre-plan your final arrangements. Make sure your family knows what you want done. And in the American way of denial of death, we sometimes don't make those arrangements. Now, it's very important if you are married to someone other than your children's parent, because the current husband or wife has the right to say what happens to their spouse's remains. And that may not be what the children want. But the children are out of luck if there is a spouse, a husband or wife, living. So it's very, very important to keep peace in the family, harmony, and to make sure your wishes are followed, that you pre-plan it. Do you have to buy your cemetery property in advance? No. Do you have to buy your mortuary arrangements in advance? No. But those are both very good ideas. But you do need to put it in writing what you want to happen. And that is to keep harmony in the family. I can tell you a story of a gentleman who was probably in his 40s, and his father had passed on. He had bought a double plot. He had his mother's name engraved on the marker, but not her final date. Mom remarried. The current husband did not want her placed by the first husband, even though that was the plan. He didn't want her in a casket. He wanted her cremated. He didn't want her ashes placed in that grave, nor in a wall, nor anywhere else. He wanted to just scatter them. This was not the plan as understood by the family. And it caused so much heartache and put the son in such a deep depression that he lost his job. He was consumed by anger and depression. And that was just something that happened because of lack of foreplanning. So that's my pitch. Take it for what you want. But each one of you, if you put your plans in writing, please give them to your attorney, give them to the person who has your power of attorney, give them to your pastor, somebody who's going to be there and wave that paper and go, no, this is the plan, okay? Just for your own protection and for peace in your family, for your children. Cusham acted on impulse. He did not know what the plan was. He didn't know what the negotiations were. He didn't know that there might have been a harmonious way to work this out. He just saw that there was somebody standing in the way, and he took care of it. Now, it was impossible for him to know that because he was deaf. But did he take time to communicate however he would have communicated at that time? No, he didn't. He just acted. Which brings us to the scriptures we read this morning. From the Psalms, and they admonished us to wait, to listen, to let God deliver us from circumstances. How many times do we act on impulse? How many times do we just get the urge to do something and go for it without considering the consequences? We have the misguided belief oftentimes that here's a situation I can handle. This is what I'll do, and I don't think anything bad will happen. But then, because we didn't follow through with the plan and we didn't consider the repercussions and we didn't understand that when we sow a seed, we reap from that same seed, that there are consequences that we never dreamed of. That if we had paused to wait, to listen, to seek wise counsel, that maybe we could have avoided those circumstances. We just react. We react in anger. We react in grief. We react in shame and guilt. Or we react from joy and do something that may be a little improper. However it is, we need to learn to be patient. We need to learn to be wise. We need to listen and carefully consider the advice we're given. There was a lady one time that I knew years and years ago. She was involved in a cult and unfortunately had influenced other people into the cult. When she realized the negative situation she was in, she and her husband got out of it. But they were not able to influence the people they had brought to the cult, to influence them out of the cult. And fortunately, I believe they all finally got out, but not without scars. Saw this lady in a coffee shop one day, just sitting there reading the paper. What are you doing? I'm just waiting on the Lord. And I kind of snickered and thought, well, you should be doing something. But actually, she was listening to the scriptures. She had acted impulsively. She had followed a wrong prophet. She had influenced people to do something negative that was not good for them physically or emotionally or spiritually. And now, rather than rush into something else, she was waiting on the Lord. Now, I have in my notes we should read scripture, we should seek wise counsel, we should pray and meditate. I'm way ahead of my notes. But she was reading the newspaper. But God can speak to us through many things. He speaks to us through our experiences, through our life, through wisdom that we've acquired, however, or from just the chance encounter. And I always say, if he can speak to the nation of Israel, to the prophet, through a donkey, he can use anything he wants to speak to us and get our attention and let us know what his will is in our lives. Does this give us license to procrastinate? I am the chief of procrastinators. You all need to know that. So I am not pointing any fingers anywhere but here. No, this doesn't give us a license to procrastinate. It gives us a license to listen and to act on what we hear. If we wait, patiently. It keeps us from reacting in anger. It keeps us from putting vengeance on those who have irritated us and angered us. It helps us to understand a situation and to act with a clear head. It enables us to clear our mind of all those negative things and to let God speak to us. Also, it means that we can follow God's leading, so we don't push through doors that are closed to us. Oftentimes, we'll have an idea and we want to do it, and we will just push through closed doors thinking, I've got a better way. And then the consequences of not listening are negative. Not necessarily bad, not horrible, not life-threatening, but not the good way that it could have been had we listened and been patient. We need to be sensitive to the Spirit's direction in our lives as believers. He prods us to go a certain way. He prods us to accomplish a specific task. He causes us to maybe go out of our way to speak to someone that we hadn't planned to speak to, or to take time to visit someone who's housebound or in the hospital. Take some chocolate chip cookies to somebody. I'm waiting. Michael is on a diet, and Kelsey's on a diet. I can't bake cookies at my house because, that would just be evil to them. So I bought cookies at the store last night. They weren't homemade, but I even got caught with that. I have to think about these things because I want to be a good example to my family too. Last week, Pastor Dave talked to us about the yoke that is given us from God. The yoke is easy and the burden is light, is what his thought was. Because when he places desires upon us, when he places tasks upon us, when he directs our life, he doesn't just say, go in this way, do this, and you're on your own. He says, no, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I am with you always to the end of the earth. And even though we still have problems, and even though life is just not Christmas every single day, it's a lighter burden, it's a lighter yoke than the one we put on ourselves through our own decisions. I referred to that infamous person, Samson, of the tribe of Dan. Samson disobeyed the laws. He touched a dead thing. He killed somebody. He gave the secret of his strength to Delilah, and she cut his hair, and he lost his strength. Samson was made a captive. His eyes were put out. He was made to grind grain for the rest of his life, walking around in a circle in the granary, grinding grain. That would be a heavy yoke. That would be a really much heavier yoke than just obeying the rules that he was given to live with in the first time. His strength returned as his hair grew. And in the end, we know how he leaned against the pillars of the temple, and with his strength, he was able to pull them in and crush them, and the temple fell and killed many, many people. God's will was done, but it was done with Samson suffering much because of the decisions he had made. His burden wasn't light. When we act impulsively in our own emotions, without waiting for God's directions, and we take on our own burdens, reaping sometimes heavy consequences, and missing the joy of God's leading in our lives. I leave you with this one thought, one of the scriptures from our passage this morning. And while it may sound repetitious, it's making a point that we need to hold on to. Truly, my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from him. Truly, he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will never be shaken. Yes, my soul, find rest in God. My hope comes from him. Truly, he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will not be shaken.